called We Found Out How Much the UFC Fighters Get Paid, and it's kind of shocking. So I thought this would be pretty interesting to go over. So even if you're not a huge sports fan, there's something wildly entertaining about watching a UFC fight. What's even more intriguing than the fighter's ability to withstand multiple strikes and overall blows, however, is just how much they're paid per fight. So according to International Business Times, there are 3 salary tiers that a UFC fighter can fall into: low, medium, and high, with the lowest earners taking home between $10,000 and $30,000, and the highest tier ranking in between $500,000 and $3 million per fight. So while you might think that only the winner would be paid, both fight participants actually take home cash, and depending on the tier that they fall into, which is largely determined by the size of their fan base, they'll take home their base earnings, and if they win, they'll earn an additional prize according to International Business Times, and those prizes can sometimes so much as double their base pay, though. That typically only applies to the first 2 tiers, because you also got to think about the first 2 tiers are more likely to have the pay-per-view points as well. Now, to further illustrate the lucrative road of UFC earnings, let's look at Conor McGregor, aka the highest paid athlete in the world. Despite infamously losing to DP, or Dustin Poirier, in January 2021, Conor took home a jaw-dropping $22 million. His last fight before that was in January 2020, in which he earned $30 million for knocking out Donald Cowboy Cerrone, which means for 2 fights, FYI, he's only had 3 since 2016, he earned $52 million. While it may seem like a ridiculous amount, you have to consider what these fighters are putting on the line and the risk associated with the sport. Now, according to recent research, MMA fighting, which is customary of UFC, can lead to chronic encephalopathy, damage or disease that affects the brain, which can lead to memory loss, personality change, seizures, and more. Now, something to also really think about too, right? Like, some people might think the UFC needs to pay their fighters more. How could someone agree to be paying $10,000 for a fight, right? Because I believe this actual starting thing is $15,000 to fight starting off, and another $15,000 if you were to win. I think that's the starting base pay, right? And yes, that is a very low amount of money, right? But you also have to think about it too. If someone is entering into the UFC, one of the largest organizations, basically the largest organization for MMA, right? Basically the main spot that everybody wants to be in, right? But you go there with no social media following, no real marketing apparatus to where you can actually drive a lot of sales to your fights, right? Because you do not have that when you typically start entering into the UFC, of course you're going to be paid a lot lower, because the UFC will actually end up losing money off of marketing you, right? They literally have to create a fan base for you, right? Now, a lot of people might say that's a bunch of crap, blah, blah, blah. They should still be paid more. And I understand that. But you have to view it in the eyes of the business, because these fighters that start off on the very low, low base pay, right? They do not bring money to the company, right? So the company is going to continuously lose money from marketing the fight of those people. But they counteract that by having people who have massive viral and organic social proof, social growth, right? To where they use someone like a Conor McGregor, where they know for a fact simply putting him on a card will generate them millions and millions of sales, right? Millions, if not billions, of clicks or impressions and all that kind of stuff on all their content surrounding the fights and some of the fights afterwards, right? And I believe the UFC president Dana White, he actually mentioned that when after Khabib beat Conor McGregor for, I believe, the second time, first time, I believe, right? Like, basically the total amount of like impressions, I think the total amount of clicks that they got surrounding Khabib was about 1 billion or more, right? So you can see just how much money some of these top paid fighters could potentially bring because of the social pull, right? Because you got to think about it like this, right? If no one sees what you're selling, no one is going to buy what you're selling, right? So all these like low-tiered fighters, I understand them like complaining about their pay. I understand people like basically saying like, dude, you're not even making like the average annual income of the United States, right? I completely understand that. But the way to get out of that and the way to have never even gone into that position is to build a super strong social media following of people that are willing to pull out their credit card or their debit card and buy a pay-per-view fight. This is the reason why you have people like Logan Paul or Jake Paul being able to pull in millions and millions of dollars for boxing, which they both don't necessarily really have any experience in. So you got to think about that. It's all about how many people can they get their eyes to see what they are trying to market, and how many of those people can they convert to actually sell, right? This is also the same issue that you see with the whole like TikTok versus YouTuber social gloves fight, right? Even though all these people that were involved in it had massive social media followings, all of their social media followings were typically of people who were not willing to pay to see a fight, because most of their audience is extremely young, and a lot of young people do not have money to actually go and buy a fight, which is why you need an older fan base that is willing to pay for whatever it is that you're involved in, right? This is why a Conor McGregor can make a lot of money. This is why a Khabib can make a lot of money. This is why now Dustin Poirier can make a lot of money. This is why when you get to that UFC top dog status, typically speaking, you can make millions and millions of dollars because you now have created a fan base of adults willing to pay a lot of money to either go see you lose or to see you win. And that's the main thing that you really got to understand. This is why the pay is so drastically different. And this is why you could end up having someone like, let's say, Donald Cerrone, who, if you see his personality, you're going to like the guy, right? But skill base, he's not the best fighter. But he gets a lot of people to pay to see him fight, which is why he's able to stay around in the UFC for such a long time, even losing a bunch of fights, and still make a lot of money. This is why you see a lot of like heavyweight fighters in the UFC, even if they might lose at any given point, still make a lot of money because they drive people to go and buy their tickets, right? Because everybody typically wants to see like two big dudes just deck each other out and see who ends up getting on the ground, right? It's very entertaining, and the fan base is typically people who are willing to spend money, right? That's the thing that you really got to understand. You got to have, one, a strong fan base, two, a large fan base, and then three, the fan base that's actually willing to spend money. That being said, whichever like salary tier that any of these fighters are, or if someone is in a similar situation where you have different like pay tiers in your job, it doesn't matter how much you actually make. It matters how much you end up keeping, right? Because look, you could even have people in the UFC making like $2 million per fight, and living paycheck to paycheck. A good example of this is Tyron Woodley, where he had to basically fight Jake Paul because he spent pretty much all of his money, right? It was pretty evident that the reason why Tyron Woodley agreed to fight Jake Paul was because Tyron Woodley lived basically paycheck to paycheck, right? He even mentioned how he literally spent all of his money, even though he made about I think $4 or $5 million in a few year time span when he was the champ. He literally spent all of his money. That's what he said. He spent all of his money, right? Because he thought it's just going to last forever. So it doesn't matter how much money you're making if you spend it all. This is why you need to learn how to get out of debt, manage your money, master your money, so that regardless of how much money you end up getting paid from something like this or from a job, you're sitting financially stable. So go check out 14bucks.com to learn how to get out of debt.